Yeah, well, actually, the error that you're looking at really is probably the most underdocumented error of the DC punk scene, I would argue.
And why is that? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, because maybe I mean there are people that were around that did some video recording. I think Evan Keeling did. He's posted some stuff on YouTube. This guy Chris Henderson took a bunch of photos, I remember. But it's not. But maybe it's because no one's had the urge to actually kind of to put something together, and also very few of the bands actually moved on to a more of a national scene. You know what I'm saying? So that
Well,
could be a
I,
big part of it.
I think a lot of that was that there were a lot of bands that, that wasn't their ambition.
Sure.
So a lot of bands never went national because that's not what they wanted from music and from playing. They
Yeah,
just
but what I'm saying is because of that,
yeah.
that's probably why there's really no, say, archive or record of that period that's kind of definitive. There's no band in DC book from that era. There's no documentary, to my knowledge, from that era. And maybe because everybody was in it at that time, but no one's felt the need to actually do something about it, I guess, until you came along. So
I stumbled across that idea myself. I mean, I was looking for more information about all the bands that I had listened to growing up and had listened to living in Northern Virginia, and there just was nothing on the internet.
yeah.
It was as if a lot of this had never existed because it wasn't on the internet.
Well, the other thing too is basically when this scene was coming up, the internet had just really started, and I would say the majority of people in that scene didn't even have emails at that time. It was right, especially in like around 93 and 94. I think I got my first got online in 95, I guess, and I didn't even know, what to do with it. So I think the Suspects came up with a website in 96. Well, I'm
Well,
correct. And we had a flaming skull GIF. That much I remember.
that's way ahead of your time, to even have that technology at that point. That's pretty
Yeah,
impressive.
because I mean, so that's another reason why you're not able to really find anything, because the internet wasn't really there. I mean, you might be able to go to like the DC Public Library has a punk rock archive, and they might have stuff in there. But outside of that, I don't. There just was really very little record of that stuff on the internet.
Well, even before that, what do you remember? Were you a part of that first DC scene? I mean, as a fan, and in
By
terms,
first DC scene, you mean like the 80s?
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I started going to shows in like 1984. So I missed the Minor Threat era. Um, However, I was there for like, Rites of Spring, Dag Nasty, Swizz, and all that stuff. Um, and yeah, and so I was just, as an attendee, I didn't even play in bands or anything like that. So, but I would always go to DC Space, the old 930 Club, whenever I could go to, occasionally HB Woodlawn would have shows. West Hall actually was the major place, really, I thought back then. That would have a lot of the really big touring bands come through. So yeah.
How did you get into that music? How did you get into going to those shows?
I I was at a boarding school, and one of the kids at the boarding school had recordings of, I guess, Minor Threat and Black Flag, and I was into skateboarding at the time, before I even knew about that punk rock stuff. So that's basically how I found out about it. And then when I'd come home on the weekends or for the summer, I basically uh, wound up kind of going to record stores and noticing these flyers, and yeah, and that's how I just went to my first show was Naked Raygun, TSOL. I think GI played on that bill, another band, Serial Killers, I think. And then the second show I went to, which is kind of notable in a way, was um, Mission Impossible and Lunch Meat. And Mission Impossible, that was Dave Grohl's very first band.
Hmm.
So that was kind of cool. Then from there, I went off and I think wound up seeing Dag Nasty and Rites of Spring and all that kind of stuff.
What was it about the music that appealed to you most?
It was just different. It was aggressive. It was more how I felt myself at that time.
Did you get yourself sent to boarding school, or was or was that
No, no, my parents lived overseas, and the education wasn't as good. I guess were we in Thailand maybe or something like that. They had an American school there, but the government paid for me to go to school here in the US, so that's how that came about.
so your parents were actually living overseas while you were here?
Hmm.
Wow, that's interesting. So they were is that part of why you were in the DC area?
Yeah, well, we've always lived in the DC area. That was like home base, right?
Okay.
So it was like, we'd go to just like a different country like every 2, 3 years.
And is that do you think that like shaped you in terms of music or playing music? I imagine it would have been hard, like, making friends in those places, and you probably spent a lot of time by yourself.
Well, no, not really. I mean, there's a lot of Americans that work at embassies or on military bases, and they all have their own communities. So it wasn't really, and then there's other international communities too as well, because you don't just hang out with Americans, you hang out, I don't know, with people from Portugal or with Sweden or wherever. So, but music really didn't have much to do with that at all. I mean, skateboarding was one thing I discovered over there and was really into. But outside of that, yeah, music really didn't play much of a role. Although I will say, I remember hearing about the Sex Pistols over the kitchen table one morning when my mom was reading an article about them. I guess it was maybe in the New York Times, and she was like, she looks at me and goes, "Chris, you wouldn't listen to this kind of music, would you?" And I was like, "No, sure wouldn't, Mom." And then the first thing I did when I got to a record store in Finland, I think, was go to the punk rock section. I bought a Clash album and a Devo album. So
Nice. Well,
so,
that helped.
so that was it. That was it. That was the only influence. Other than that, you know, I didn't know what was going on in the United States, the DC area at that time.
Well, I mean, growing up around the world or going to all those different places must have, opened you up, expanded your horizons, made you open to different ideas and stuff like that too, though.
Well, yeah, but it also kind of worked as a handicap in a couple ways too, as well, because I wasn't as familiar with American culture, for example. Um, when I was growing up in these other places, I had friends from all over different countries, right? So issues such as racism I never understood it or got it, right? So I never really thought about that much until I was exposed to it back here in the United States. So that was kind of, really weird to me. It's like I couldn't understand why people would even be like that. And then, other things like just common slang or even how you speak is different. So I actually got held back in school in, let's say, I guess it was first grade. I got held back because I could speak Danish better than English at that time.
Do you still speak Danish? Do you
No,
still
no, I don't. I don't speak any languages. And in fact, I struggled with languages all through school. The only thing I could understand was Latin, mainly because you didn't have to pronounce it, right? No one knows how that's pronounced. So there's no language lab for that. So that was Latin was kind of cool in that sense. But other than that, not really.
Well, when did you start playing music?
So I didn't start I didn't start really playing in bands until my last year in college.
Oh, wow. You're
Yeah.
a late bloomer.
Yeah. So, I mean, nobody in I guess my sister played piano a little bit, but I had zero interest in that. And so it wasn't until there was a party at our house and one of my roommates who played guitar, everyone was sitting down and kind of jamming, and there was like a bass sitting around. Believe everyone was tripping on mushrooms too. And they're like, Chris, why don't you play? And I was like, I have no idea what to do. They're like, don't worry, man, just follow the dots. And so I just followed the dots, followed where their hands were, what dots they were on. And we started a band at college. It was kind of like a hippie jam band thing. There was really no punk rockers in my college. There was one, this guy Evan, who was a straight edge skateboarder from Boston, and we just didn't really. I mean, we got along, but he wasn't. He was kind of weird. I got along better with I guess with the hippie types.
Well, when did you get your own bass? Was that the first thing that you got, or you just took that?
So we wound up. Yeah, I was using my friend Joe's bass, I think. And then I wound up buying my own bass, which is still the same bass that I use today, which is a Music Man. Yeah, I bought a really nice bass because I was like, I'm going to be, because I also took some lessons to figure out what the hell I was doing. And I took some jazz lessons and then basically and bought the Music Man. I think at that time was like $700, which is really expensive in 1990 or 1989 or whenever I bought it. And then yeah, and I would just basically sit in my room and just learn stuff by ear, from everything from Parliament and Funkadelic to the Who to the Minutemen. I actually listened to a lot back then. Red Hot Chili Peppers, learned a bunch of their songs. So yeah,
Good bass players, all those bands.
well, yeah, definitely, yeah.
I mean, that's pretty expansive, like, repertoire of music.
Well, I wasn't playing punk rock at all, because there was no punk rockers in my college. So I was playing, with, there was really, yeah. So there was no, I didn't get to play punk rock until after I got out of college and moved up here and wound up, meeting Kent Stax and Brian Harbin and those guys, Brian Gayton. And then it was like, yeah, I was like, I know how to play bass, and I've always wanted to play punk rock, but nobody I ever played with ever even really knew how to play that right. So.
Well, that's an impressive group of guys to fall into, just like, randomly as your first.
Yeah, I was super psyched because I remember Scream was actually one of my favorite bands growing up and to see, right? And I remember seeing like the Kent Stax version of Scream a bunch. And I always thought they were better at that point than they were when Grohl joined the band. They got a little more kind of not metally, but a little more rock and roll. I felt. So I was like more of an early Scream fan, and so yeah, to get to play with Kent, I was like, hell yeah, this rules.
So those guys just weren't they weren't doing anything as a band before you got there? And then
I think they were just messing around in the back of this warehouse in Arlington. So yeah, and we all just kind of came together, and and I was like, hey, I got an idea for we had this other guy that was singing, but he was terrible, so we kind of kicked him out. And I was like, this other friend of mine, Brian Gayton, who didn't know any of those guys, I was like, it's like, let's give him a try. And he just came in. It was just awesome.
And so when did that officially become the Suspects?
93.
And how did that come about? Like, how did you guys find the name, and how did you find your first gigs?
Oh, so well, the name. So the guy that kind of connected us all together, Sean Epstein. I came up with the name, I believe, or we all agreed upon it. And like I said, like after a practice and a half, we kind of kicked him out. and then and so we just started, we played I guess like a house show or like a party, I guess. And then really, dude, we were like kind of stuck because there was no other punk bands at that time in DC at all. I think Bikini Kill had just kind of finished, and there was really no scene. And so we were just going to get shows wherever. So we would just kind of, we played Iotas, we played this place Heaven and Hell. Yeah, we just tried to play wherever. It didn't really matter where we played at that point because there was no punk rockers around. It wasn't until we heard about this place called The Loft in Baltimore. And so we managed to get a show there. And we played there for all of like maybe 10 people, but they were 10 punk rockers. And those guys just kind of flipped out when we were playing, and they became like our biggest advocates. And because of them, they wound up telling their friends. And so we had a strong, like a heavy Baltimore crowd or Maryland crowd when we were all in Arlington, Virginia, So, but because of those guys, that's kind of really kind of how it expanded from there. But it took we played to nobody for like a year and a half or 2 years.
Do you think
I mean nobody, man.
Is that good for the band, or do you think that was hard on you guys?
Well, we didn't really care at that point in time because we knew we were like the only people around. I mean, Kent had told some of his buddies, like I'm sure Skeeter came to see us at some point or whatever, but those guys were like all older then. It wasn't until like the kids in Baltimore. So I don't know. I mean, it was it is what it was.
How much were you aware of any other things going on in Northern Virginia at that time? Like Avail had started Jam for Man, which is what kind of, or that's where I get the homage of the name.
Yeah. So, but I think Avail started well before us.
Well, yeah, they started like 88.
Yeah, and I think they wound up moving to Richmond, so they weren't really in the area.
Yeah, well, they didn't move to Richmond till, I don't know if that was 90. It was definitely in the 90s. Definitely like early 90s when they moved.
Yeah, I mean, we were not aware of Avail at all. I mean, like I said, we were not aware of any bands. I mean, because they're really, I mean, we would look, me and the singer Brian Gayton wound up at some show at Asylum, but this was after we had been playing a little bit. Because there was a bunch of bands, and I think we saw like Next Step up there, which was all this kind of what I would say more the new school hardcore, like the beginning of that stuff, and that really wasn't our thing. So like we really didn't fit in with any kind of scene, and I guess there was a straight edge scene around at that time maybe, but we didn't know any of them. It was kind of like like we were just very disconnected. If there was a scene, it really, we weren't aware of it. And basically, what happened is like we eventually got this place O'Carroll's to play at, and from there, I think that was booked by John Fox maybe. Anyway, someone whoever was booking that, and we wound up playing with all kinds of different bands at that time that weren't, I guess people wouldn't really call punk. I mean, we were playing with Dismemberment Plan, we were playing with Frodus, we were playing with oh God, who else? Well, there were some other punk bands that were younger, but they were fans of us, like the Rejects. There's a band called Invaders from Uranus, who I guess would be our contemporaries. And then it wasn't until a couple years later when things like Positive State and Shoutbus and that whole kind of Fairfax scene, I guess, kind of exploded.
Yeah. Well, those are definitely a lot of the great bands that were playing around that time. And certainly like all of them had members from Northern Virginia.
Yeah. And I mean, but like I said, at this time, like all of these bands at that time really did not have their own scene at all, right? The scene was actually all of us.
Yeah.
So, like Dismemberment Plan and Frodus fans were also Suspect fans and vice versa. It wasn't really, there wasn't, oh, you're a punk rocker, you're a hardcore person, you're a indie person. It wasn't like that. It's just like, oh, you're into music, cool.
And do you think the lack of the scene was because there was not a cohesive sound, or do you think it was because there weren't enough places to play, or was it because there was a lack of communication?
I sort of think it on a bigger sense, it had more to do with how Discord had shifted away from punk and hardcore to more kind of at that time, it was mostly kind of math rocky experimental stuff that they were putting out. And while there was a scene for that, those people weren't there. There was no one doing punk rock stuff. So I think people just kind of followed. Oh, this is what Discord and I guess Team Beat at that time and Simple Machines also as well had their own little things going on, but none of it was punk rock. And therefore, nobody was really kind of playing punk rock, I guess. I mean, like I said, like we started off in a vacuum and played in a vacuum for like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think like Dismemberment Plan and Frodus, in particular, like why we actually played together quite a bit was because they didn't, just nobody really fit for us. There wasn't a larger scene that was like, hey, we want to be part of that. Or, I don't think any of us at that time were really like, we just didn't feel like, why, there was no interest in even or desire to go play with, I don't know, maybe Branch Manager was around at that time. I don't recall, but that kind of stuff.
Well, although all of it is pretty loud, energetic, guitar and drum based,
Well, yeah, but not really. I mean, at that point in time, all of it was really kind of angular and math rocky and trying to be different time signatures and complicated. It wasn't about, I mean, Suspects were basically like a pop band. All of our songs are like pop song structures, and and I mean, and Frodus had that element, and so did Dismemberment Plan as well. We were more, I guess, songwriters instead of trying to be how weird can we get with time signatures and and whatever,
Yeah. Well, so did you model yourselves at all after the Ramones?
No.
I noticed the the Chris Suspect like thing. It just reminds me a little bit of
yeah. So the reason for that is because no one could pronounce my real last name, so people just started calling me Chris Suspect.
Okay. How do you pronounce it?
Oh, it's Condayan.
Okay. That's what I assumed is the pronunciation, but I wasn't sure.
Well, good for you, man, because not many people do that.
So, okay. I mean, because that's very Ramones-ish to just be like, okay, we're songwriters, we're simple, we're straightforward, we're just gonna make pop songs but with loud guitars.
So yeah, but that wasn't really. So our influences were more of the UK sounds of, for example, I'm a big fan of the UK subs, the Damned, Coxbar. These were kind of like influences for us. Discharge. So it wasn't so much the American punk or the Ramones. I mean, of course, we liked the Ramones and we liked Black Flag and that stuff, but really we were more kind of influenced by the English sound, Sham 69, things like that.
Your mom must have been so disappointed.
They never came. My parents had never once came to see me play a show.
Really?
Yep.
That's terrible.
Yep. Never.
I just meant because she's the one who started you going down that road.
Yeah, I guess inadvertently.
The Sex Pistols conversation. So, in terms of when did you guys start recording your music?
That began, I think, in 93, definitely. So the folks at the Positive Force House, which is a guy, David Curtis, who still is in the scene, and Brendan Hoare, were like, you guys got to put out a 7-inch or something. So we all kind of worked together to do a 7-inch, and we went to Inner Ear and recorded 5 songs, actually, and put 4 of them on a 7-inch.
What did you think about going to Inner Ear?
Well, we kind of went there because Kent knew Don, and we also knew, hey, this is where, a lot of the good bands that we liked from DC record. So
I meant what was the experience, and was it a cool thing being there, knowing like all the bands that you had enjoyed?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think at that time they had Studio A and B, and we were in the B studio, and this woman, Brooke DeLarco, actually engineered us, and I think she was the sound person for the Ramones or did their live sound or something. She had something to do with the Ramones. Anyway, she really liked us a lot and kind of worked with us, so it was really, really cool.
And when were you able to then transition into putting out the full length?
Not too long after that. It was like the next year, because we had a bunch of songs and we sold out our 7-inch, which gave us enough money to do the full length, I think.
How many did you press of the 7-inch? Because I don't see any.
I think 1,000.
Online.
Maybe 1,000 to start, and then I'm pretty sure we pressed a second 1,000, maybe even a third 1,000.
Okay. And then when you moved on to doing the full LP, did you recorded that at Inner Ear also?
Yep.
And in terms of like the songwriting on there, what was the process of you guys creating songs?
Oh, well, actually, we all wrote stuff together, really, man. So either Kent would come up with some riff, or I would come up with something, or Brian. All of us wrote stuff, and all of us actually contributed to each other's songs.
That's good.
Yeah,
good.
so there wasn't really one main songwriter. Everybody, is super democratic, I would say.
Did you have favorite ones from that album?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course I liked some more than others, I guess. I mean, but I like them all. There's nothing that I cringe about.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty great album.
No, well, thanks. That's awesome of you to say.
Well, I think it's one of the few, albums from that time that really stands the test of time and is really still very, very listenable today, and can't really be pigeonholed to that place in time. It could fit in, virtually anywhere on the spectrum of punk rock.
Yeah. Well, Grave Mistake re-released that 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, you guys got back together to play a show when that happened, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. I'm trying to recall. Yeah, it wasn't because of the record though. I think we just got back together because Brian was like, "Hey, I got this shed in the back of my house and we're jamming. You want to come over and jam with me and Kent?" And I was like, "Sure." And that kind of started like organically too. I think we actually practiced for like a year before that reunion show, but just messing around. We weren't even. We had. I don't even think the idea of even doing a reunion show came up. Wasn't until I guess somebody heard, the Suspects have been kind of practicing or something like that, and maybe that's how that happened.
When you do that, are you playing the old songs? Are you just throwing out like cover ideas, or are you still going like,
Actually, no, we were playing old songs. We were writing new songs. We actually had a new song that we played. Yeah, or trying to relearn like old songs that we never recorded. So
well, that's cool. You guys all stayed in touch and stayed pretty friendly,
yeah.
and everybody stayed in the area.
No, our singer moved to North Carolina, so that made that a little difficult. Like, so me, Kent, and Brian were just jamming, like basically the three of us. Um, and basically, I think me and Brian would just take turns singing. But then when we got the reunion show thing, then Brian would actually came up a couple times, or more than a couple times, really, to practice for the show.
And the show was at the Black Cat, right?
Yes.
Was that was that a positive experience? Was it fun to
Oh,
meet?
dude, that was a blast. The only bummer about the whole thing, and this is kind of crazy, is that at the end of the show got raided by the police and shut down because apparently somebody got stabbed at the show.
Jesus.
But it turns out nobody got stabbed. What
Oh, okay.
happened is the guy that volunteered to take photos during the show for us was so enthused, he got in the pit and was slamming around. I guess he fell and he fell on some broken glass and he cut his butt, or his lower back, and was bleeding, but didn't notice it. And then some girl saw blood coming out of the back of his t-shirt and then told somebody else that it looks like somebody got stabbed in the pit. And then word spread, and I guess they grabbed him and brought him outside. They're like, you're bleeding. He's like, I had no idea. And they're like, what happened? He's like, I don't know. And this girl's like, you got stabbed. You got stabbed. And so they wound up calling an ambulance and the police and all this. And it turns out, by looking at the footage, I guess they meticulously combed through the security footage and they see that like there was no fight or nothing to indicate any kind of something that would lead that to happen. And they realized that he had fallen down at one point kind of hard when he was dancing. And I guess somebody was like, oh yeah, that's around the time I had to go clean up that broken glass. And so, yeah. So it was basically downgraded from a stabbing to a slip and fall. So
Not exactly Altamont.
However, though, I have to say, like people were like, man, you just set a new bar for reunion shows in DC. So that was kind of funny, but it really sucked because I actually had my kids there and they were like, why are the police in here? Why are they asking everyone to leave the club? And we had people that had flown in from all over the place, and like we couldn't hang out with anybody after the show because everybody got kicked out. So
Well, I imagine that wasn't the first show that you ever played that was shut down by the cops, though.
oh no, it just seemed very appropriate actually. It's just like back in the day.
Oh yeah. So, how long was your run with the Suspects?
That went all the way to about 20 or 2000, around 2000.
Okay. And what did you what made you guys want to stop? What made you guys
Well, we had it was just, like over time, like we wanted to do more touring, not, Brian Harbin hated touring, so he left the band, and we had Scott playing guitar, but then he kind of wanted to go in a more metal way, and none of us were happy with that. And basically just people kind of dropped out, and we picked up some other people here and there, and basically, it was at one point we actually had a pretty solid group together together. It wasn't exactly the same band, but it was pretty good. But it's just the reality of actually having to kind of live on the road as a touring band, I think, was a little too much for our singer.
Was there a highlight in terms of touring for you?
I mean, in terms of like, I thoroughly enjoy touring, if that's what you're asking.
I just know, was there like a show or something like that where you felt like everything was working and it was just really fun, or an amazing experience that you were, really, really happy to achieve as a musician?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. The greatest part wasn't when we were touring. Those playing with the Ramones was probably the highlight. So
Okay.
that was pretty cool.
Where was that?
I was at a place called Capitol Ballroom that I think wound up turning into Tracks.
I
So
remember.
it was the first show of Capitol Ballroom. It was I think it was the day Jerry Garcia died, so it was August 9th, 1996. And and that was that was a killer show, man.
That's great.
So I don't, and then, like over time though, we wound up playing with all of our heroes. We played with the UK Subs a couple times, played with the Business. I don't know. We, played with, we actually enjoyed playing a lot of shows with Violent Society out of Philadelphia, and the Blank 77 out of New Jersey. Those are kind of our touring buddy bands. Yeah. So
Now during that run, you formed Torque Records, right?
yeah. Well, that wasn't just me. That was so that started with the very first 7-inch of the Suspects, and that was Brendan, Dave, Curtis, and myself.
And you did that in order to put out your album?